Hello, I'm Nathan Gonzalez, and I'm going to be discussing some data that I found through my research of employees and their thoughts on communication from the Springfield Emergency Department. The three different methodologies that I used for this research were survey, focus group, and web analytics. I'm going to talk a little bit about the survey first. So the graph you see here takes both questions 1 and 4 and combines them to show the number of years each position has worked according to the web survey. And this is very important to consider because I believe that the numbers of years plays a big role in someone's opinions about their workplace. Ideally, someone who has worked 10 or more years' opinion is more valuable than someone who has only worked a couple of years. So as you can see here, physicians and nurses in the 1 to 5 year category and the 6 to 12 year categories, there's more of them compared to technicians and secretaries. And then you see there in 13 to 20 and then the 22 to 40 range, it's relatively low in all positions. And I think this plays a really good factor when you try and think about, is this communication training really going to benefit my employees? So the graph you can see here, it represents question 11 from the web survey, and the question asks participants, how important is staff members exhibiting a friendly demeanor in providing quality healthcare? The answer choices range from not important to very important, and in between were somewhat important, neither, or important. The numbers in the graph represent the different ages from the participants. The third question in the survey was asking the participants to write down their age. So as you can imagine, we received numerous ages, and what I did was I grouped them into 5 different age groups. Number 1 being ages 20 to 29. Number 2 represents ages 30 to 39. Number 3 represents ages 40 to 49. Number 4, 50 to 59, and number 5 is 60 and above. So the graph shows how each age group answered that question number 11. And as you can see, there's a correlation with the older age group 5. They answered the highest on both not important and somewhat, and then they answered the lowest on very important. The younger age group answered the highest for important and second highest for very important. I think this shows the way generations think about friendliness at work, and I think that plays a factor in the percentages that you can see here. So the graph here is titled Overall Participation, and I think this is very, very important to see, because if participants didn't necessarily participate in the communication training, then their opinions aren't necessarily valid, because our overall goal here is to increase communication in the hospital. So question number 5 in the web survey asked the participants, did you participate in the communication training? And this graph here shows the raw numbers of the survey participants. So the total number of survey participants was 275, and 86% of them said yes, that they did participate in the communication training, and 189 said they didn't participate in the communication training. And this is really important to look at, because this shows how people feel about the department and whether or not they attended the communication training. And this is very valuable to look at when we want to consider what's best for the future of the hospital. The graph here represents the data from question 6, which asks participants to rate from strongly disagree to strongly agree based on this statement. In this unit, there's efficient communication regarding patient care. And what we did here was we separated it from the different positions, which was question number 1 of the web survey. It told the participants to circle which exact position they are in the hospital. And I think it's interesting to see that nurses rated both high in the strongly disagree and strongly agree categories. There may be a sense of confusion when it comes to communication. There's possibly more detail in the future. As you can see, secretaries rated very low on all levels. I believe this is due to the fact that they don't necessarily come in contact with other employees, they're probably just in the front of the hospital frequently checking in patients in order for them to see nurses and then physicians. And I think the same goes for the technicians. They rated high on strongly agree, which could be because they don't always come in contact with other employees as well. Physicians rated extremely high on the categories neutral and agree, and relatively low on strongly agree. This could be the fact of having to come in contact with the nurses the most, and this could be kind of like a two-sided predicament where the nurses strongly agree on efficient communications, and then the physicians necessarily don't see a problem with it. This graph here shows the results from question 8, which asked participants to rate whether people treated each other with respect in the unit, and if they strongly disagree or strongly agree with it. And once again, we can see that constant trend of physicians agreeing and nurses disagreeing we saw in previous graphs, and that's basically what we're getting from the data. And I think not only this graph, but the other ones prove that as well, that there is a gap between nurses and physicians. I think that the inclusion of technicians and secretaries is great, because it allows an opportunity to prove that there is a problem between medical-based employees instead of other ones. Now this slide here combines two graphs from questions 12 and 13, and both of these graphs also reflect the data from question 2. Question 2 was a simple male or female question, and then question 12 asked the participants, how often do you use email to receive work-related information? While question 13 asked, how often do you use face-to-face discussion to receive work-related information? The top graph is the results from the email question, and as you can see there, both male and females rated relatively high in the daily section, so that means that they are receiving emails on a day-to-day basis. Whether they check them or not is a whole different story, but they relatively rated high in that perspective. When it comes to face-to-face, we see a similarity, as both genders rated high on that as well. So what we can see here is that there is communication in this department. There's a frequent transmission of communication, whether it's email or face-to-face. Even though that there is a problem in the hospital, it's good to see that communication is relatively flowing. Now the next thing that we have to really look at is, why is there a problem? Now this graph here, entitled Value of Respect by Position, represents the data results from question 8. And question 8 asks the participants to rate whether people treated each other with respect in the unit. I once again categorized it by position, because I feel that that's very important to see. And the graph really shows that constant trend that physicians are agreeing and nurses are disagreeing. And I think this is very important to look at, because there is a problem with communication in this department. If one position is agreeing on something and the other one is disagreeing, there's obviously a conflict between the two, and that's something that needs to be looked at in order to solve this problem. This graph here represents the data from question 9, which asks participants to rate the quality of communication between staff members and patients in the emergency department. I once again created this graph to analyze the data and use question 1, which asks them the various positions. And as you can see here, this graph shows a little difference compared to the rest, because physicians' percentage of very poor was higher than the very good percentage. And the graphs before showed that that was completely opposite, that physicians were relatively positive and nurses were relatively negative. This points out that in fact a percentage of physicians do see that there is a problem of quality of communication between the employees. Once again, nurses answered high on the poor portions, which reflects the physicians' answers to the other questions. Now this is the last graph for the survey data. I feel like this is the best one to end with because it's very positive looking into the future. So this graph here represents the data from question 10, which asked the participants to rate how satisfied they were with their jobs. You can see that 36% were strongly satisfied and 33% were satisfied. This is very huge and important to look at. When you combine those two, that's more than half of the employees at the department that participated in the survey. So that's a great thing to look at in the future, that these people are very satisfied with their jobs, even though that there is a problem. Now that I talked about the survey data, the next slide I'm going to talk about what kind of perspectives and ideas that we gained from the focus group and how similar they are and how they can really benefit this organization. So the focus group that we conducted contained 7 participants from around the department, and I'm going to talk about kind of the 3 main things that we grasped from that data. So the first one is this constant trend that we continue to see, that nurses are being generally negative when it comes to communication in the department. And what the focus group showed was that because nurses feel that they are relatively looked down on due to their position, and that kind of brings us to the second one, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, which is a gap between the employees. And what the focus group showed was that the nurses often stated that whenever there was a problem in the department, that they were always shut down and they never really had opportunities to express their opinions. And that brings us to our next one, which is a gap between employees. So in the focus group, a lot of the participants said that a lot of the higher employees talked down on the lower ones. Whenever they were staff meetings, they controlled it. They didn't want to hear anything negative. It was often a lecture-based meeting. They kind of griped the employees out instead of giving them information or upcoming events for the department. But relatively, I think this is probably the best methodology that we used. It really gave us some great quotes to use in the future in order to fix this problem. And that brings us to our third goal, or kind of big thing that we saw from the focus group, which is a positive outlook. Although there was a problem with communication, all of the participants said that they are willing to work towards a more benefiting future. They are willing to take one for the team or step up or do whatever it takes for this department to be successful. They want it to be a fun place to go to. They don't want to gripe about work anymore. They want to say that they are excited to go to work the next day, and that they can really talk to not only their fellow nurses, but their the doctors or the secretaries, that they can all be one team. And I think this is great. That's kind of what we got from the focus group. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about the web analytics that we kind of looked over an amount of time using Nuvi, which is a social media analytic website. So like I said it before, we used Nuvi, which is a social media analytics website. We relatively looked at tweets from around the United States that pertain to the hospital. So this first graph here shows the overall number of tweets in a span of a week, starting on April 15th, which was a Wednesday, and going until the next Tuesday, which was April 29th. So you can see here that the first and second day were pretty slow, with only a total of 94 tweets between the two. The third day was, I would say, the most successful day. It showed the greatest tally with 198 tweets. I believe this is because it was a Friday. You know, most people like to go and tweet on Fridays because the weekend's about to come up. They probably have much more on their mind and stuff like that. During the weekend, there was an average of number of tweets, and then again, things picked up on Monday with 132. And this could be because people are busy on the weekends, and once they get back, you know, in that weekday mode on Monday, they have a lot on their mind and pick back up on there. So overall, the most tweets we see is in the beginning of the week, which is Monday, and at the end of the weekdays, which is Friday. A really interesting thing that the website Nuvi does for its clients is that it allows them to see the reach that each tweet receives. And what reach generally is the chance to quantify the users that engaged with the Twitter profile, as well as their followers. So this graph here analyzes that same week that we saw in the prior slide, which were the 7 days, April 15th to April 21st. And as well as you can see to the right is the overall reach. So the results were very drastic, I feel like, because some days were low and about 2 days were high in reach. You can see that Friday, April 17th, the reach was 14,000. And I still feel that this is because, you know, Friday, people are talking about what they're going to do on the weekend. We talked about, you know, the end of the week and what happened with that. And due to the different proportions, the overall reach was just above 60,000 at 6,000, which was 6,374. So for the future, I think these numbers are fairly good, but I do think if they were better, the department could see a boost in morality. You know, they can see that people from around the United States are talking about them, and that they, you know, think that the patient care at the hospital is good. So the next slide, I'm going to talk about kind of like the location aspect of it all, and how people from all over the United States are talking about the hospital. In a total of 600 tweets, locations varied, so what I did was I separated the locations into 4 groups: North, Other, South, and West. North consisted of many states in both the North and Northeastern regions, so New Jersey and New York, things like that. Other was either blank spaces that Nuvi couldn't necessarily find the location of the tweet, or users that had on their profile generally United States. South was every state in the southern region, so Texas, Florida, Alabama, and other states around that area. And West consisted of the states California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Oregon. So the data show that the North region had 49% of the tweets, and South had 32%. This necessarily doesn't surprise me because majority of the tweets were from New York, Maryland, and the Vermont regions, and then a lot of them were also from Texas, Alabama, Georgia, and then California also had a number of tweets. So I think this graph really reflects that very well, and this could be used in the future when considering where patients are talking most about the hospital, because this hospital receives patients from around the world, so this is a cool thing to see what patients are saying about the hospital. Another neat thing that Nuvi does is that it measures the sentiment breakdown of tweets. And the 3 main categories of sentiments are positive, neutral, and negative. A total of 72% of tweets were positive about the hospital, and then 27% were neutral. And I think that 1% that you can see there of being negative is great. This is a great morality booster for the hospital, and this is a chance to let employees know that the department is being talked about in a positive light and around the nation. I really didn't talk about this, but I think this is a great time to bring it up. In the focus group and in the survey, patient care was talked a little bit about and how important it was to the employees, and of course they answered that it was something that they generally cared about. And so I think this graph is good to show the employees that, people from around the nation are speaking positively about your work, and they think that y'all are doing a great job, and there's nothing necessary to worry about in that circumstance. So in the last slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about another thing that Nuvi measures, and that's Twitter influence. And I think this plays a lot to do with this sentiment breakdown. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is Twitter influence, and basically what that is what a Twitter user's credibility is, and how much following they get, and how important they are to Twitter, and how much influence they have on other Twitter users. So these are the top 4 Twitter influencers from the Web Analytics data out of the 600 Twitter users. And as you can see, they all have something in common. They are all news outlets. This is awesome. This is a great way for the Springfield Emergency Department to get their name out in the media. And it's good to see that the media is talking about them, because these 4 news outlets have a very good following in their areas, and they're something that predominantly is important in not only in their regions but in the nation. They are some of the top news outlets. So I think that will really benefit this organization and give them some sort of a morality boost. So that's pretty much it from the survey, focus group, and Web Analytics data. We see the constant trend that there is a problem with communication. And I think if we show the employees this data and let them know that there's different opinions on certain things, and not only them, but the patients are talking about them, but in a positive light. And if we bring those 2 things together, that can really merge into something good for the future of this organization. That's all I have, and I thank you for your time.